Yeah.
Well, welcome up, Const. Is it Const, right? Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah, that's it. Const, like the variable, you know?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, but I wanted to be sure there. But people will start funneling in here, so maybe we give it a couple more minutes. But really happy you came by.
Happy to be here.
I heard you guys had just had a community call. Is that right? How'd it go?
Yeah, we had a community call. We were just talking about some of the parameter changes that are coming in. Every 2 weeks we do a call, talk about what's happened over the last little while, and discuss, and then take some questions from the community. And generally, they're pretty pointed and well knowledgeable questions because people are using the software and being like, "Why doesn't this work?" Um, and Opportunity to yell at us. So it went well, though.
It's always good, man. And that's one of the things about Web3, and I feel like is community is super involved, and sometimes that comes with a whole entire headache of its own, I guess you could say. But I think it's also part of the decentralization thing, right?
It goes two ways, definitely. I mean, you're part of a nation state, and you have people in your community didn't even know you needed in your community, and then they're there solving problems for you. Um, and filling in the holes. I think that if you run a traditional company, you just don't have that visibility because people are not incentivized to do any work for you whatsoever. So you're like, oh wow, look, we have a whole marketing department that just popped up over here, and they're incentivized to do guerrilla marketing for you in a really fantastic way. It's not something that I would know how to implement myself unless I hired, an expensive marketing team. So I think like that's one of the beautiful things about just sharing ownership with people. It really allows them to express their value into a community, and a normal company doesn't have that.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, I think Jay could also speak to this too. With we have a kind of like a a decentralized news media thing that we're trying to help build up, and WAG Media, and really uses the Kusama token, right, to incentivize people to create content and to find like information out there. And I agree with you 100%. Like people will take ownership of their own work and really just come up with some pretty incredible things and just take off.
Yeah, and it's I know that you guys want to talk about Chat GPT at some point today. Been reading their research for a little bit, so we knew it was coming along. We didn't know it was going to be as good as it eventually was, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, at some point. But they had to do a lot of labeling in order to get their data set up to speed, um, and because we're playing with incentives and where we have a nation state behind us as a project, we don't even really need to go to um, for instance, like the Mechanical Turk. We can build those kind of tools right into our community, and hopefully leverage, the power of the crowd. I mean, that's part of our intention when we want to hit that benchmark as well.
Awesome. Well, I think that we got a decent crowd kind of building up here, and as we go, I'm sure more will come in. So we'll just go ahead and get started if you don't mind, man.
Let's do it.
So yeah, everybody here and everybody going to be listening afterwards. This is Simon Knights. I'm C Saint here with the Kusumari, and we got Jay up here too, and a lot of our regulars. Welcome, everybody. Love it. Love the sound effects. I do want to make sure to let everybody know that this is completely open space, meaning I will have questions, of course, that I've prepared, but especially anybody from the Batensor community, anybody in the crowd that has any questions or wants to just jump in the conversation, feel free to request up. We'll get you up here and get going. So to start us off, we got Const up here, one of the co-founders of Batensor, and an active developer as well. Wanted to make sure we highlighted that he's definitely a big part of the community still. Still working at it. So I just want to start with Const. If you can tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your role with Bitensor and how you guys came up with the idea.
Bitensor, my girlfriend says Bittensor. It's a bit of a hard one to say, but I think have a at least a mild understanding of artificial intelligence, or if you've been in the crypto community for more than 1 year, you know that it's bit tensor, right? Instead of bit tensor. And uh, I have my roots in both fields, so it was definitely something that was an obvious connection in my mind. Um, when I was, I mean, I'm a trained machine, but I was also very much attracted to the power of decentralization, and specifically things like Bitcoin, through my university degree. And then, after my university degree, I got very fascinated politically and also, technologically in Bitcoin. But I was interested in it for, reasons aside from merely the political. What I saw with Bitcoin was technology that had created the largest supercomputer in the world. As at the same time, building a censorship-resistant technology that allowed us to, have freedom, money, and all those things that are very important and underlie the the amount of power that computation that is so which underlies what they're using that computation for. Um, and and I think that there's a lot of people that are also interested in that question. So Bitcoin gets so large. And they were talking about it at Neural IPS. I was just at Neural IPS last week, and we were part of the decentralized AI workshop there. It was very interesting, and there's a lot of researchers that are have been and are looking at peer-to-peer technology as this way for soaking up all of this computation, which is latent and unused, or is is being incentivized into existence. That's really what Bitcoin is doing on the flip side, and so I wanted to take that and turn it towards doing artificial intelligence. So that's where I came into to BitTensor and found this project and wanted to be a part of it and wanted to build it, and I've been at it for many years now. Um, the question is always, how are you going to do that, right? How can you leverage the same way that Bitcoin leverages computation, but to do artificial intelligence? And our thinking is that number one, you need to figure out a technique for machine learning that is distributed or decentralized. So, what is a decentralized technique in machine learning, and how can you then map that onto a peer-to-peer network? So, we use a mixture model style approach, where the model itself is sparse and split up, and then we can stitch it together from and build models on top of it. So that's a mixture model, and that's the approach we went with. Sort of joining together sparse networks into larger ones, which are better than the sum of the parts. And that's a little bit like the sparsity of the human mind. So anyway, so that's one tool in our toolkit. The second, I think, more important one is, how do you validate machine intelligence? How do you creating it, and who's not creating, or who's doing work and who's not doing work? And in the case of Bitcoin, it's very easy to do that, right? Because evaluating whether or not a hash is properly hashed or not is just like O of one operation, right? You look at it and you say, okay, great. In Bitcoin's case, you actually just need to count the zeros at the beginning of the hash. Um, with machine intelligence, it's much more fuzzy. It's much more difficult to discern, separate the non-intelligent from the intelligent, and but you can still do it. And when I was working at Google, and also studying machine learning before that, we learn various techniques for determining what is useful and what is not useful, and that's the study of salience methods, they're called. It's the methods where you can determine whether or not, for instance, a neuron within is useful. And if it is useful, then you don't want to prune it, you don't want to change it, and the inverse. And so we basically combine those technologies together with blockchains to build incentive mechanisms for distributed, decentralized, highly sparse neural networks. And then Bob's your uncle. That's what BitTensor is. That's what we've been doing for the last 2 years, coming up on the set. And Yeah, it's been growing like crazy, and really exciting to see how this technology is exploding and the people in this chat are making it a reality with us.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, the way you described that is a really good picture. I think using the human mind is a great way to think about it. And you talk about, like, pruning those neurons and pruning those models that are useful versus non-useful. When you say models, are these like individual nodes? Are these like people who are deploying their models from their, like, personal uh, whatever they've developed themselves? Maybe if you could expand on that a little bit.
It can really be anything. In practice, people just host the best model that they can, right? That's the most efficient market strategy for BitTensor right now, that I think people have discovered, and there's even some miners in this call that I'm sure you can bring up to the stage here, and they'll tell you better than me. But really, these endpoints that we're stitching together are just functions. They're generalizable functions. They don't need to be whole machine learning models capable of doing everything, and they just need to be able to do this translation from inputs to outputs. We call them neurons through like a biological analogy. They could be a single layer. They could be an individual behind a keyboard. They could be your I mean, obviously, none of those things would work. And in practice, you need computation, like heavy computation behind these endpoints that can do the inferencing, like to actually run the function, no matter what it is. Um, so so in practice, they are machine learning models, and they're hosted on um, I would say enterprise level software most of the time, VPSs, people's home computers, and capable of taking textual inputs. In BitTensor's current implementation, current iteration, we're just working on text, so they're able to take text inputs and produce outputs in two ways, really. And the first way is by producing just raw representations, which is just a set of numbers that represent the text, and then also logits, which are the predictions for the sentence, which allows you to do things like generations. So it's just kind of like tensor type outputs that are slightly different. And that's where the name comes from, bit tensor, being that the output of these models are the output of these endpoints is tensors, and we can use those tensors to do all sorts of things. We can build applications on top of them. We can train from those outputs, and I'm sure I can get to more of that later if you have the question.
Yeah, I think that kind of leads us into, maybe if we could parallel this a little bit for the people that may not have the exact background, of artificial intelligence and having a familiarity with it. If we could parallel it maybe to OpenAI and this Chat GPT, which
Yeah,
everybody's pretty enamored with. How do you parallel the
yeah,
Tensor versus OpenAI and apps versus GPT
right.
and such?
Right. It's amazing what they've done. And they've really giants to build this application. They've reached into, I would say, like kind of unpopular artificial intelligence domains. Number one being supervised learning, and also reinforcement learning, and use both of them in conjunction with unsupervised learning. And I'll explain what those mean in a second, to build this really interesting technology, this really interesting application. So they've like pulled together all sorts of different types of machine learning to build this amazing tool. Now, so all of the things that they built, though, the Chat GPT, for instance, this application, rest on top of language models that are pre-trained. So they what they did is they took their GPT line of models and they fine-tuned them to examples which have been generated from a set of like 40 or so in labeling and answering prompts. So if you use the GPT-3 model just by itself and you ask it to say generate, okay, you type in a sentence and it'll try to complete it. It will try to like uh, you say the cat went to the park. It will then say and it walked past the dog and it was chased, right? Because that's the natural completion of the sentence. But it's not what you need for an actual chatbot, right? So what they did is they took that model be able to complete sentences as if they were naturally occurring, and then fine tune that. So then took some labeled data sets, and they generated those labeled data sets from individuals, and use those prompts to basically train it even further to specifically solve the task of being a chatbot. And so they made it useful with the supervised data set. So how does this connect to is working on just that initial stage? Like, okay, can we complete the sentence? Can we complete the sentence? That's the self-supervised or semi-supervised problem of understanding language, and it's usually called representational learning or pre-training. And uh, we work on that because, as I mean, ChatGPT is a good example of a technology that's built on top of that, right? So the computational power to train these really intense GPT models, and then they took this fairly bespoke, interesting, you could say like machine learning technique, supervised plus reinforcement learning, to fine tune it to turn it into something that was really useful and amazing for people. So to get back to the question, which was like, so how does BitTensor fit into this? Like we're focusing on that unsupervised layer, and making sure that we can match the GPT-3 styling, and at the same time we're designing and dreaming about what we can do to perhaps even build something like a BitTensor, a chat BitTensor on top of our level, on top of our foundation, so that we can have that in our Discord, and or build an application to showcase the technology to other people and get people interested in what we're doing.
Um, I got a question here. So when you introduce blockchain into this equation here, what is that unlocking? And also what kind of obstacles does that present
Yeah.
as opposed to like the chat GPT thing? It doesn't seem like you're using blockchain at all, right? So what's going on there?
Right. I think like the best way to understand what we're doing with blockchain is that blockchains allow us to open up closed systems, bordered systems. So a company, it's a company which you have to apply to and is controlled by an HR department. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, they have to pre-think about what they need, and it doesn't just get solved by them, because there's a whole bunch of people that are inside their community just solving problems for them. Um, when you use a blockchain, when you use a permissionless system, when you use an open system that's governed by incentive, you attract solve problems for you in really efficient ways, and you attract, in our case, computational power that is maybe not accessible to us, if we didn't do it in a really efficient way, right? There's all these Ethereum miners out there which have GPUs. Now, people have heard this point many times. I think it's well talked about that you can, if you can attract the Ethereum miners and those GPU resources, you'll be able to get a lot of compute, and that's definitely true. That's what we're using the incentive for, is to stitch together a whole bunch of resources into a supercomputer, which is going to be on par with and maybe even exceeds what a company like OpenAI has at their disposal. I mean, that's $1 billion problem because they have $1 billion from Microsoft, and a lot of our competitors have hundreds of millions of dollars of funding. But our claim really is that we can get bigger if we stitch even more together, right? If we build open protocols, Bitcoin being a good example, we can get really, really big. And then I'd say on top of that, if you use markets, and I'm really, firm, strong believer in the power of market dynamics to help with certain things. And one of those is to get people to produce commodities cheaper. And what we're doing is representing this thing that we really need. We really need representational knowledge. We really need computers which can solve these micro problems together. So if we build that into a market, we can leverage the innovation of this open, decentralized, borderless worldwide community to do it even better than maybe a centralized bureaucratic one can do. Now that's I'd say the core value proposition of these open systems. Now then there's a plethora of ethical ones as well. I think I'm a crypto anarchist at I really believe that if we can build open systems, then we can distribute ownership and govern them transparently, and that'll be really, really good for us to control something that's as powerful as artificial intelligence in the future. Now, right now, we don't have the best in the world. That's OpenAI. But I think if we can compete with them, it would be really good for everyone involved.
Yeah, and that was one of my huge questions once we got into OpenAI was, a lot of these. It's not like AI is brand new, right? AI has been around for a while, and when I was doing some research on the video that we did for you guys, Google's search engine itself is, AI baked in through and through, right? And it's
Hmm.
controlled by Google. They leverage it for their own, gain,
Yeah.
and they even monetize that in certain ways. And so I guess the other thought there is, OpenAI, even though they're not maybe doing that right this moment, that can also be, it's controlled by a central entity and can be guided, and the weights can be changed, the input, and so on and so forth can be changed by them and censored by them. I wonder what
Yeah,
your thoughts
absolutely.
are on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like a new domain of censorship potential where you have all these tools that people are using in schools and across the world and to get information, and that's um, being patched by an organization which is behests to its point, or a one point or another. It really, it answers to them and not you know um, the crowd. And and I think that that's one of the beautiful things about Web3 systems is our ability to, with proof of work, um, pull in, I would say, pull in people that would formerly have no ability to get on the board of directors, right? And here they are, effectively being the board of directors of this decentralized project. And I think that's a really good thing. It's a different power base. It's like a democratic power base. Now, so the censorship thing is a big one, right? I really can see in the future, a lot of people using this technology, OpenAI's chatbot, and you say, hey, like, what do you think about this? And they're like, well, according to experts, X, Y, Z. Maybe that's a good thing. I I think that there's definitely good reason to have, a hierarchy or an ivory tower with knowledge, but it shouldn't be the only viewpoint on the world. And I think that as AI becomes more and more integrated into our lives, we should just be really careful about who controls it, and we should also have alternatives. We should let the free market really choose, and it shouldn't be a monopoly on control of that. And so we built it so that the people that actually hold a certain amount of tau they could very easily leverage BitTensor to create their own version of these technologies, because they're holding tau. So we'll have multiple chatbots built by multiple people that you can use if you want to, and that's the way that Twitter should have been built, in my opinion, a long time ago. So that's one. I think another thing is like about the revenue stream and um, the sense, look at the technology like ChatGPT and go, "Holy fuck, my job is at risk here." Like, oh my God, this thing is like scary good. This thing is gonna replace me. I better get a chunk of this. Like, I better latch on somehow. I better tether myself to this technology in some way that I'm not forgotten, right? Either by working on it, or owning it, or and we provide all of those avenues to people, right? You can, if that's the case, and we're going to build it, in BitTensor, you can own it, you can validate it, you can control it that way. You can actually control the hardware that it runs on. You can really, really get yourself integrated into this technology to make sure that you're you're not left behind, so to speak. That's more sci-fi, but I think it's a reasonable argument to keep at it.
Oh yeah, I've seen already, that there's been tweets out there, right? Like if you're not using Chat GPT already, you're behind. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it maybe that's a little bit aggressive right now, but I could definitely see it start to infiltrate the way that people work, right? Because it is such a big, augmenter of workflow, and like you said, can possibly replace a lot of, a lot of people's jobs. But Dr. M, I see you up here. Welcome up, and I saw you in the chat down below said, BitTensor's changed your life. I wonder if you wanted to expand on that a little bit.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for allowing the discussion about BitTensor. Absolutely, yes, in so many different ways. Not just in one way. I feel it's been that way intellectually, materially, and also just in terms of the general outlook of the future. Just wanted to say a couple of things, and I'm far from the only one. I, in fact, am very relatively new. A couple of months into mining BitTensor, which is the process of serving AI models at a node. And every time I talk about BitTensor, I get way too excited. But it's really because it's tackling, probably one of the most core problems of AI, and that's that this is more powerful than many of the tools that humanity has ever had before. And it's just simply unreasonable to expect that when in the hands or control of a few, that will go in the best interest of the many. And so this is, a software protocol that really tackles this in a way that works for the first time. And so I just find that really groundbreaking. I'll just leave it there for the moment. But really, what I find myself not really being able to talk about AI anymore, other than to talk about BitTensor, because I just find that, frankly, nothing in this space is quite as groundbreaking as what BitTensor is doing. And I think that the world is kind of, for the most part, just doesn't know yet. And I look forward to the future, and there is very real value building here. So we all know that AI takes training to get better, to get more intelligent, and that training is resource intensive. We also, it's already well demonstrated, and how that's a very useful thing to do. On BitTensor, I, as a person who is not hired as an ML engineer at a relatively high caliber position in a company like Google, have a chance to do this, and that's extraordinary. Nowhere else would that be possible.
Amazing take. That's I have no background in AI, but when I was reading about BitTensor, I myself was getting pretty excited about it. It's a really great, incredible idea that's working today. And GP, I see your hand up. Wondered if you wanted to add a few thoughts.
Sure, thank you, Chris, Marion, and Jay. Appreciate you giving me the mic. And hey, Dr. M, we keep running into each other. Also, Const, I just had a point to make just when I'm finished my first point. But while my primary is in computer science and postgrad is in AI, I'm not on the programming end of AI as such, more on the ethics, societal change, bias, and the importance of the democratization of the AI development in our society. Especially its removal, or should I say, at least its ability to extend beyond the reaches of the incumbents right now in Web 2, such as Google and Facebook and everybody else who contains the data set training by the people from the people that are using their platform. So I think BitTensor is revolutionary. It is, as Dr. M says, allows people to participate, and I'm a huge fan, super bullish on the whole idea. I think it is the only way to maintain a democratized AI environment and to create use cases that are in the best interests of the majority and not the minority. So kudos. It's the way to go. I think we have a problem in blockchain right now, where the call for regulation as a result of Celsius, Three Arrows Capital, Do Kwon, SBF, and Alameda has people calling for regulation, which runs the risk of bringing the same old people from the Web 2 IRL regulation into Web 3 and just imposing the same old rules and vested interests upon us. So, from an ethical bias, social inclusion perspective, I'm a 100% supporter of this model of AI training and contribution and democratization of AI. And I just want to say max respect to everybody and anybody, but most including Const and the team for working out these initiatives. They're the future. They're the future of making a positive AI environment for us all. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for those thoughts there. And something that you brought up there was having it in the hands of many, and something that can be something you alluded to was it being unstoppable, right? And when you talk about the power of Bitcoin compute, right, you speak an entire country shut down mining in China, right? But Bitcoin just kept on chucking. And if you think about that from a BitTensor perspective in an AI model, it sounds like that is kind of what you're reaching for.
Yes. Now, I think it's GPS. Brought up a really, really interesting point in the last point he made there around regulation and how it's very likely the hammer is coming down on this space. We've focused a lot with BitTensor on markets, stitching together resources, building open systems. I think that's all, but at the end of the day, blockchains actually exist to create censorship resistant technologies as well, right? And if we don't make sure that BitTensor lifts off, so to speak, into the internet, right, into a decentralized system where regulators really can't fuck with us, we're fucked. We worked really hard at the beginning of this project to make sure that ownership was decentralized, and that's our goal. Really, we need to have that ingrained into the technology. And GPS wants to say something, so I'm really curious what he would like to how he would respond to that.
Yeah, go ahead, GP.
Thank you. Sorry, there's a few hot mics. So that was Const speaking right there, was it? Yeah.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah. Okay, bro. Yeah. 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 I worry about that because, as you rightly say, an entire nation of approximately 1/5 of the world's population, whose use of the existing AI in the context of social media has introduced a social index in their country, which is oppressive. Therefore, their use of AI is more than likely going to follow the same trajectory as banned Bitcoin, and Bitcoin carried on regardless, so to speak, because Bitcoin is the true blockchain. I guess the risk about deploying AI models or attempting to democratize AI models on blockchains, it's super important to pick blockchains that can be, to use the technical term, have the lowest chance of being fucked with by external parties. There are too many blockchains that fall into the category of Bino, and I think it's highly ironic that, in fact, the hammer of regulation is coming down on us because of the actions of the existing establishment in centralized exchanges, which are diametrically opposed to the concept of blockchain, and the actions of Gensler and vested interests in the SEC and the Fed. So, some people could, throw on a tinfoil hat and suggest that that might have been a three-card trick to try and attempt to get regulation in the space. So the choice of platform or blockchain or multiple blockchains, or the obfuscation of those blockchains when using it, or using them as a platform for democratization of AI and model training, building data sets and mining and so forth, is super important, because otherwise you're just putting big crosshairs on your back, and someone's going to take that pot shot someday and shut you down.
Yeah, exactly. And we built in Polkadot because we really liked the security model of Polkadot, and we like that we can also build any type of block transition function. Right now, we've been focusing on the machine learning aspect of things, but one of the big pushes in the coming years will be to make sure that the actual chain is highly decentralized, and we'll have to figure out a way of incentivizing that, because yes, it needs to, God forbid, if Ala or myself or anybody else on the team or the foundation comes under legal pressure or physical threats, that the technology doesn't die, and that's very likely in this space, and we're aware of that. So yeah, great point, GPS.
Yeah, and that leads in perfectly to you've already kind of said why Polkadot. I being someone who's been in Polkadot Kusama for a while now, we've seen a lot of parachains come in, have specific model where, you crowd loan to them, they drop you tokens. There's collators that offer their own tokens and so on and so forth. And after reading a little bit, BitTensor isn't really that. And so I wonder, how, BitTensor sees themselves becoming a parachain and what that process will look like.
Well, we are going to win a slot hopefully in early January, and we'll be launching January 10th on that. Whether or not we get the slot, we'll have the new chain done by January 10th, and so the system will be ready for people to use. We're moving networks. The incentivization of the block, what we can do, I think the real simple approach is just to distribute a portion of the inflation to block producers, and whether or not that's 5%, 10%, 15%, I'm not really sure. That really depends on how desperately we need the mining network to secure the decentralization of the chain, or how much we need inflation to go into the mining network on the machine learning side. We can also fork BitTensor and to use other different technologies if it really looks like, and I don't think this will happen, but it is very possible, because BitTensor right now as a technology is it doesn't require its layer one. Like we are agnostic to Polkadot, but I'm a firm believer in Polkadot. I actually really love the technology. I know that it's been, Gavin's been working on it for a really long time, and I really respect him as the team and the technology I've used now for a while, written in Substrate, for instance. And I just know that this is real technology. There's a lot of FUD in and around Polkadot right now, but I'm not, down on the technology whatsoever. So I'm not going to be moved by FUD. I think really what will change over the coming months and years is that people really discover that this technology is legit, and they'll come work with us. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of questions. I'm just looking at them and wondering what people have to say.
Yeah, same. I just wanted to highlight there that, a lot of the things that you guys have been speaking about in terms of, hands of the few versus hands of the people, decentralization first, like, everything you're saying there really does seem to share the ideologies of Polkadot, right? And
yeah,
it's like a match made in heaven sort of thing.
And I might say it's like people that have been in the space for a really long time, my bias is that they care about resistance more than people that have built projects like later in the game, because they're like, oh, why do we even need, proof of work? And I'm like, do you even know what this whole space is? Like it can be frustrating. And I think that it's because we haven't even yet had the regulatory attacks that we're going to see, that they're going to come, and the people about the core technology of blockchain and its raison d'etre, like we're going to get hit really hard. So I just wanted to mention that. And I think Gavin is one of those people. Gavin is definitely someone that's been here for a really long time and understands the technology.
Absolutely. All right, well, we'll move over to, I think Alpha's had his hand up the longest maybe, and then GP and Megan after that.
Hey, man, yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak. Glad to have you guys here. I am learning a lot, and I appreciate you guys talking about all this stuff, because this is really, really impactful. Like many of us, I think I tend to look towards the future of what are the oncoming like narratives and stories that Polkadot is going to be a part of. Three of those kind of bring to mind, like come to mind that you guys were talking about. I think is very important, which is the importance of governance, right, for the betterment of the ecosystem and for the people. Security, for what you guys were talking about specifically here, not only relating to Polkadot, but what you guys were talking about with Bitensor. And so, like, all of this, and I would say anonymity, or like the ability to be decentralized, right? To keep your self sovereignty. I think Polkadot's a big proponent of that. It's one of the biggest things that I look for in an ecosystem. And one thing that I see that you were talking about, like, you made the reference to the example of the internet, right? Um, and that is this is something I personally struggle with. We know in the marketing world, a lot of AI tools are already being used. I use some of them. And so one of the things that I see as a problem is that AI tools are only getting better because they're competing against each other. And so we know right now that the internet, a fully open, decentralized internet, right, is not necessarily a good or a safe thing. This is the reason why we keep a tabs on like websites that teach you how to make bombs, etc. A concern that I see in the future, because I'm seeing some of it already being used, is taking modeling from one existing AI that is open sourced and using it in a centralized AI to train it and to make it better, so that it becomes better than the decentralized AI. Now, the problem with governance is that it tends to be slow. And so one of the things that I was thinking about for BitTensor was like, I've always had the idea, and I'm glad you guys are bringing this. It's magnificent, which is like the AI to keep on track has to be better than the next AI. But to be the safest, it has to be decentralized control. Like one entity cannot have that control. I'm really afraid of what Google's doing because as a marketer, I know that Google controls like 95% of all data. Um, and it's like they control everything. And thus having that under one person is incredibly dangerous.
Yeah.
But how do you think about that? Then I have a follow-up question afterwards.
Right. Yeah, it's a really good question. So like, um, I'm not opposed to regulation, and I'm actually not even opposed to censorship, as long as there's competition from companies to their own applications, which are more or less regulated or censored than others in the space. Um, to get a good example would be something like Twitter. It should be possible, in my opinion, that you can just fork all of the data on Twitter. And then I can use Twitter that's not censored or Twitter that is. And in my government can regulate certain Twitters, and it's up to their prerogative, in that democratic system. If there's no competition, there's a very high chance of concentration of power and corruption, rather than there's nothing pulling it away from centralized abuse of power. So that I and I think that's that middle ground where you're not opposed to, like, for instance, we released the a playground that was trained on top of BitTensor, and we built regulation into that tool. We had a hate speech filter. Anybody could also have built that tool and not applied the hate speech filter, and that's what makes it an open system. It's people's choice to use the technology how they want. Now, and the other thing you said was, uh, people taking AIs which are decentralized and turning them into centralized AIs which are better, right? That's
Well,
actually the oh, sorry, did you want to add something to that?
yeah, and the reason is because I'm seeing it where the centralized AI can train faster because it has no limitations based on governance or being open source or whatever the case may be. Like they feed it exactly what it needs to be fed.
Yeah, that's a little bit like what I was talking about at the beginning of the call, where they fine tune it. They fine tune the AI to something that is more specific to their use case. Uh, we built BitTensor to do that innately. Like that is the core technology. It's like let's general knowledge base that then the clients to the system can fine tune it to whatever they want. In the same way that you can use the fork of Twitter to make your own Twitter and fine tune it to a particular way. So the concept of sort of stealing is innate to the technology we're building.
Hmm.
Like it's inherent. It's inherent.
Great. And so that leads perfectly to my other question, which is if this is innate in the blockchain and in the open AI or like the AI
In the
that you guys
network.
are doing in the
Yeah.
network,
Yeah.
um, how does blockchain anonymity, which is such a big part of blockchain,
Yeah.
play a role into this? How do you add? Would you? I'm guessing you would need to have some kind of DID solution to be implemented, so that you're able to actually keep tabs on making sure that there's always good faith actors.
Well, I don't think we need those things. I think we already have bad faith actors in BitTensor, and the system needs to be robust to bad faith actors, or it can't be an open source and decentralized technology that runs like or an open boundary, right? There are people in our community, and it was one of the things that we talked about at the beginning of the call. Like it's a double-edged sword. There are people constantly trying to break us, and that's actually like you can't, you'd throw the baby out with the bathwater if you tried to remove all of them from your system, because they're actually the most innovative. That mentality is actually incredibly innovative, and we're leveraging it to make the system better.
So making the system better, what do you see the challenges that brings to the populace?
What do you mean by the populace? Like the
I would, yeah, like people using this, for example, being able to use a modeling
yeah,
um, to do something that is a bad faith like actor,
right,
whether it was to break ATMs
yeah.
or
It's, I mean, it's nonstop. I mean, there's so many different corner cases that come up, and that we're constantly um, patting down and learning. I mean, example today, like we had a mechanism for validators to maintain stay in the network, which was that they'd have 1024 staked on their system. So what did intelligent gamified people do is they were like, oh great, well I'll just get a whole bunch of 1024 tau and fill the network with my miners that can never get deregistered. They'll never be able to get kicked out. So I'm sure most of that is just jargon to the people in this call. That turned out to be a bad mechanism. We discovered that this was an approach that people were applying. We
Mhm.
now have to change that, right?
Right.
So it's really a continuous, and that's one of the many challenges that we're solving. It's like really interesting, my job.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, this is one of the things that I tend to quarrel over, which is like, hey, if you're not continuously innovating or pushing it,
Yeah,
you continuously patching. So it's like
yeah,
it's like you're just fighting it. And so I guess,
yeah,
man, one more question,
yeah.
which is, if you see this, what is the biggest danger that you would actually say, like, okay, I know all of the benefits, I see all of the greatest things here.
Yeah, yeah.
What is something that actually I'm like worried about or could possibly happen?
That's a great question. I feel like I'm in an interview.
Oh,
What are
sorry.
your, yeah, no, like, like for a job position, what are your biggest flaws? Um, that's a really good one. I mean, like we we don't know what would happen if there was, for instance, a large group of extremely well-funded people that were committed to breaking the system uh, inside of our community. I think that's always the risk, right?
Hmm.
The formation of cabals, the formation of groups of people that are coordinated and malicious,
Yes.
because especially in decentralized distributed, hard to know who's who, and that's part of the anonymity, and also to, so you how do you detect them, like how do you know what they're doing, and I think, like, as we're pretty small, there's definitely actors that could take us out. It's like in the early days of Bitcoin, like it wasn't censorship resistant against a government until
Mhm.
like maybe this year, right?
Right.
The United States government could have just bought all the ASIC miners in, you know 2012, and then it would have died, right? That would have been a a large scale coordinated actor. And I think that there's a certain level of scale and maturity in the technology that we need before we'll be fully resistant. And we're aware of that. And that's kind of like, that's the thing that keeps me up all night is, okay, what's that thing look like? What could they be doing and to manipulate the incentive or hack the system? And we have to be aware, and there's unknown for us. That's a really good question.
Well, I'm glad you guys are here in Polkadot, because I think what Polkadot offers with governance too, and the decentralization and the security, I think you guys are gonna. I'm ecstatic to have you guys here and be part of the eco. You guys have a lot to offer.
Thanks, Alpha.
Alpha, really, that question that you had last, I thought you were asking if iRobot is a possibility. Honestly, that's what I was I was wondering. But GP, my friend, how are you? You got something for us?
I'm going to defer to Megan the Token Blonde because I've asked a couple and she had her hand up. So if that's okay, if Megan still wants to speak, I'll defer and wait till she's finished.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, actually, I just had a few technical questions, if that's all right. Because some people here in the audience know that I'm a fan of proof of work, and I'm always asking about solutions in the substrate ecosystem that are using that. And I'm just wondering, and I do apologize if I missed your explanation of how proof of work factors into your solution earlier. But honestly, a lot of that stuff just went right over my head because I'm not like a computer scientist or anything. But yeah, I was just curious. And you mentioned that your solution doesn't rely on a layer 1 right now. Is that right?
No, it is a layer 1. I mean, so we have our own chain, if that's what you mean. And so we
Okay,
have our own
cool.
block transition function, which is currently a POA, so it's a proof of authority. There's no proof of work involved, and neither is there proof of stake. It's really just a set of validators with their own keys that get to sign blocks, and that's like so fully decentralized proof of work block transition. And on top of that chain is where we run the BitTensor incentive mechanism, which has its own consensus. So like, think of it like a single smart contract that runs on, or a pallet, if you know Polkadot, that runs on top of a blockchain, and that's where the BitTensor incentive mechanism runs, and that's where we focused most of our research and development because that's what makes us unique. Now we can always, Polkadot's a great portable, ecosystem of technologies we can plug and play POS or POW at a later date for the block transition. So right now, the way in which we distribute tokens is fully within inside that palette, which is a POI, you might say, or it's like UMA consensus. It's all our form of consensus.
Okay, very interesting. Thanks for explaining that.
GP, did you have something?
Yeah, bro. Yeah, thank you. So we have precedent for the establishment making moves on new democratized or privatized methods for the populace to communicate in the form of secure email, secure comms, the encryption debates, and the dark web. The way they started their attack on that was with warrant canaries, NatSec letters, and red notices. They infiltrate, observe, profile, plan, and then execute in order to dismantle. And we have precedent for that in Hansa Web and Alphabay, dark web markets. I think the thing about bad actors in an open source environment is that in the existing infrastructure, my experience working for intelligence services and working for anti-corruption initiatives, the space is full of honeypots right now. They're observing. they're looking at weaknesses in the system. Regulation is not here because they're slow. It's not here because they're just wait. They're looking at the actions of people in order to determine what the possibilities are. And I think it's very much demonstrable by the Pegasus software group, software provider in Israel, and their warehouse of 0 days and exploits, which they provide to undermine secure comms globally to governments. I think similarly with blockchains, they're finding or looking for the loopholes, and they will act upon them. I think finally the patent farming, the buyout offers, the attraction of money will allow people like Google to retain ownership of these initiatives. And ultimately, money is what appeals to a lot of people, and buyouts appeal to a lot of people. So the obfuscation for corrupt behaviours in some of the case management or developed intelligence systems we built, which were built on blockchain, were specifically catering around identifying bad actors and preventing them from deletion, obfuscation, alteration, manipulation, false augmentation, exfiltration, and willful negligence. And you have to build those countermeasures into your architecture if you want to be robust. But if the founder is doxed, and Alpha AI did mention about blockchain anonymity, the unfortunate truth is that while when you get on blockchain and you have an address, you are anonymous, but your entry point to blockchain, 90+% of the entry point to blockchain to actually transact is through a KYC AML exchange in a CEX. So it's quite not as anonymous as it is made out to be. So yeah, the open source and the detection of corrupt behaviors, the ability to maintain independence from either regulatory pressure, money pressure from buyouts, or legislative pressure, it has precedent in the areas of secure comms, encryption, dark web, and secure emails. And there has been people who have been the subject of warrant canaries and NatSec letters who have had to let their systems be infiltrated while the organizations gathered intelligence on the communications. And if the individuals who develop these new methods are going to be doxed, they are the weak link in the chain, because the pressure brought to bear on them to give the keys to the kingdom is the weak point in the system. So yeah, it's based on experience, and I hope that makes sense.
Wow.
Titus, you had your hand up, my friend. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, buddy. Wow. I mean, that is scary shit. I've been a victim of that. But I don't do cryptocurrency or nothing like that, or investments. I work for the children, man. I work for the babies in this world, and it seems after I basically gave my life to them and put my head on the chopping block and snitched on some folks, they came after me, man. And when I say they came after me, the government came after me in creepy ways, like on Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And I pissed some folks off so bad. I've literally been placed in the algorithm, and it seems, I might be wrong, but it seems like we all are programming the AI, you know what I mean, to understand the destructive nature of what this world is. If truth and love prevails, it's going to mess the algorithm up, because the algorithm was created on evil and lies and murder, rape, and pillage. Like, I mean, in life in general, and on the stock market.
Ouch, ouch.
Yeah. Oof. What a great sound effect. There you go. But yeah, I mean, I think what GP brought up, and what you're touching on a little bit, Titus, you can't necessarily take away those bad actors. And what Kant's has also reiterated a lot as well is that part of the decentralized model is you got to take some of those tough things and be able to learn from them, adapt, and make your product more robust. And it
Yes.
sounds like
Yeah.
with the decentralized system, that is exponential in terms of the number of nodes you have. The more people that are contributing to that system, the stronger the system is overall, and maybe the quieter those bad actors become.
The technology inherent to machine learning is imitation, and so in many ways, people that we use to train it um, will be reflected in the technology itself, right? So um, the people that, and then the question
Absolutely.
is who gets to choose, right? Who chooses the data, and that's kind of where we start our our journey with BitTensor, right? So yeah.
Yeah, it's a good point, and that's something I think a lot of the people in the Polkadot ecosystem may echo in terms of the tech reflecting the people that are within it too. I think we see that a little bit, right? Like Polkadot's focus is interoperability, and a lot of these teams in this space really work together. And it's almost like the tech and the people have found themselves in a way. I don't know if that makes sense, but something I've seen to notice a little bit there, that the product attracts a certain type of person and certain groups. But GP, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, that's a core area of my interest, which is the bias of the training data set being reflected through the bias of the people who are providing the data for the training data set, and it's one of the real weak links for either poor or negative outcomes or false positives. Dr. M has heard me mention this before, and the quality of your output is only as good as the quality of your input. I think the point that Titus made in terms of bad actors in the system and the personality of the individuals or organizations who create these systems is very much like the relationship or the personality that a dog has based on the first 6 months of its life and reflecting its owner's behavior. AI is very like that in terms of it takes on the personality of the people training it. The training data sets that Google have is basically the entire world population who use it. Same with Facebook and all the facial recognition and the NLP programming, and the annotation of our images has basically been free consulting that we all willfully or willingly provide to them to annotate the pictures to help train their AI. Those type of resources in the context of what is a very small ecosystem now in Web3 are not as available. So one wonders about how swiftly the AI and so forth can evolve within the blockchain, considering the number of users of the blockchain right now. I agree with Titus. I think the invention reflects the personality of the inventor. And we've got to be very careful about the quality of training data that we provide. But yeah, that's I have other things to say about that, but I just don't want to go on monologues. But yeah, there you
Please
go.
be careful. Please be careful.
Alpha, do you have something to add there?
Yeah. I think that's why I was talking about. You want to keep it open source, but I do think that like Gov2 or even something like what Follow Network is doing with, the tracking using soulbound tokens or NFTs to track an identity without losing your anonymity. For example, it's like walking down the street in New York City. People know you're there. They walk into you. They might even bump into you, but they don't know anything about you, right? They know how you look and that's it. So there's a certain level of anonymity we just accept as a populace, right? The same thing can happen in blockchain. And so I do think you were talking about 90% of anonymity is kind of lost because you have to go through some kind of KYC process, right? That's correct. This is why they want to ban mining or any kind of like, this is why I really do believe that things like Bitcoin or like just general mining, the ability to generate some form of transactable value outside of the system is super dangerous because it keeps your anonymity. if you have just a random address that has a miner that is generating Bitcoin and Ethereum that is transactable and now has value, that is dangerous because they don't really know who's doing it or how they're doing it, who that person is. And then you can take those Ethereums and use them wherever you want. So that keeps your anonymity. I do feel like we were moving in that direction, which was one of the most bullish things for crypto in my aspect. But we get into this danger now where it's like, because of all the tools and amazing ability that crypto and blockchain bring to the table, you need to have some form of DID to at least have some kind of on-chain identity without ever giving away your real identity on. And I think that's something that BitTensor could, if apply in a way through regulation. You said you were pro-regulation and obviously keeping things. Well, I think that would be like a really interesting discussion to have.
I,
Through
I'm
gut.
I'm okay with the endpoints regulating themselves and choosing the regulation that they want. I want to keep regulation out of the base layer as much as possible. I should be free.
Yeah, and so you're using
As
decentralized governance for that, right?
Yes, and we haven't really figured out how we can do that. So you've raised a lot of interesting points, and we could definitely use a DID system. And there's a lot of really interesting ideas in that space. It's very difficult, to get soul-bound tokens onto a chain. In a way, it's like um, it really defeats the of crypto, in some sense, when people become super KYC'd. And I really think that, as much as possible, we should figure out ways of doing it without needing identities on the chain. It may be a requirement though, and like may just be that the regulators come and really really pressure us super early to make it impossible to do things like governance without doxing our community. Have to fight that battle, I think, pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it all comes down to if you're never ever having to generate anything in the system, you never have to use a SEX because you don't use dollars because you mined all of your coins, then you become a very anonymous person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's great. I really want to promote that as much as possible. It's freedom for the people that work with us.
Yeah, I agree there. GP, you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks. Doesn't that alpha AI depend on the device you're using, though? Because this is the complication of anonymity. Your entry point to crypto, okay, may not be KYC AML, but you're on a digital device, which is profiled, which is trackable. There are multiple layers of breadcrumbs and digital footprints you're leaving before you get to the point where you can become an anonymous user of crypto or blockchain.
Yeah, that's why they had to take Tornado Cash out, and that's why the founder of that guy is in jail, but SBF isn't. That's what's really worrying. It's the fact that everyone wants to talk about Tornado Cash was bad for some reasons, right? But there's a reason why that guy's in jail and SBF or people like SBF aren't. It's because the less anonymity you have, the least powerful you are. So, I mean, all of it plays in. There's strength there.
Yeah,
I totally agree. I mean, they got their jail sentence extended by a further 3 months until they sold his Corolla or something to pay for his defense. While, as you say, SBF is giving interviews with the New York Times. So that plays exactly to the narrative that we're all aware of here, which is if you're the small guy with the innovative idea who's got something that's a threat to national security, you're immediately going to be put behind bars. But when you're SBF playing with the big boys, actually playing a 3-card trick to probably accelerate regulation, you're given you're getting puff pieces from the New York Times and have the absolute cheek to be still tweeting that you're trying to learn what happened. I mean, how stupid, that reflects how stupid these people think we are. Luckily, that's not the truth. Const and Alpha AI and Titus, So over the last 4 years, as a result of our work in other areas, we put together a four-part solution, which I don't want to mention the name of my project if that's against the rules of the floor.
That's all right. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, so at the answer, um, we have combined digital identity with what we call TAMI, the answer access method, which is based off two patents I hold in blockchain data processing protocol and virtual blockchain access method. That gives a very high degree of anonymity and also gets rid of federated and centralized control, which are typically two of the major reasons why we don't have anonymity or control over our data in Web 2. It also then, Titus and Alpha AI allows the person with the digital identity to proxy their identity or the elements of their identity that they wish for whatever service that they're choosing to subscribe to. Also takes away the walled gardens and gated silos, and therefore by extension the power that they hold by retaining all the metrics and analytics under the digital identity and or which can be represented as an NFT. Then sitting alongside of that, within the digital identity and the access method, the user themselves is employing big data analytics and AI tools in particular to scan physical objects, to take their unstructured data and make it structured data and use analytics to perform operations against that data, which they can then sell as opposed to give to for free to organizations. So as opposed to you being profiled, you profile yourself and then can sell the specific elements or monetize the specific elements of your own behaviors to organizations who have value or put value upon that. This is manifested in the real world by dApps which you can sign on to, using centralized and federated logins if you wish to, or with DIDs. And what it says, the timeline is to migrate, or the objective is to migrate these tyrannical Web 2 processes to Web 3 over a period of time to result in, the achievement of what we're always talking about, which is mass adoption, but without having to do the mass education at the same time. It undermines federated identity, walled gardens, surveillance capitalism, the erosion of civil liberties, surveillance capitalism, mass surveillance, abuse of power, privacy breaches, unauthorized monetization, and gated silos. And finally and foremost, underneath all of that, it supports the liquidity within the coin's infrastructure, crypto infrastructure, by not allowing it to be only subject to rampant speculation, but also to have the coins be used for the exchange of product and services by people in the real world who know nothing about the underlying technology. In other words, abstract totally the technology of Web3 from the use cases at the front end. And with that, elements of that can certainly be pals of the attempt to keep the AI on the blockchain experiment away from the prying eyes of those who would seek to undermine it.
Man, I have a friend named Bruno. I think you guys would get along. He also hates the United States.
There's always a wager, gentlemen. There's always a wager between good and evil. So those both people have to fight their own fight, the good fight, the bad fight. And like I said before, and what I told you about what I'm into, in faith in God, I'm not sure if everybody believes, and it doesn't really matter. It does, but not to, I'm not in control of that, of course. But in faith, you know what I mean? I do what I do in faith of the algorithm, in faith of the good, not the evil, the good, not the bad. So the anonymity of yourself can also be dangerous, because whenever you're behind a block wall, how are you going to know, you know what I mean, who to look for when you're scared and running?
Well, to clarify something, I don't know who said it, but I don't hate the United States. I hope that didn't come across in
No,
my
it's a
words.
joke. It's a joke because Bruno talks about it a lot, but he's a decentralized maxi as well, and we just joke that way because everything you named off is very like American. Like there's a lot of corporatism, right? So it's a joke. Don't I didn't mean any offense.
Oh no, no, I'm not offended. I didn't want you to be offended. So yeah, no, no, man, I have a thick skin, bro. I don't get offended that easily. I just wanted to make sure it's not a political statement. Anything I've said, all it is an attempt. Well, not an attempt. It's been a lot of years of work and a lot of money that we've bootstrapped ourselves to try. I've been around a while. Okay, I was. I saw the semiconductor when I was a kid on the science shows and the doom and gloom that people said would follow its adoption. I worked in the early internet in New York City and Tribeca. I was part of the startups that, like the Street.com, Vignette, ATG Dynamo, Haute Couture, Pop.com, if you remember those guys, lastminute.com in London. Went through the sort of winter of 2002 to 2008. I then became an alphabet agency contrarian and an advocate for civil liberties, privacy, and the maintenance of our democratic rights when social media started to be adopted. It was clear that Zuckerberg and others didn't have our best interests at heart. Keenly interested in the non undermining of encryption, and wrote for Peerlist until they were closed down. A million infosec professionals globally writing about their stories, and I think these subjects are simply moving, or these challenges are simply moving from that domain into this domain, and it's incredibly important, while we're all excited about the technology, that we understand the realities of the way the world works. Somebody spoke about the good feeding the bad, or the fight against good and evil. I mean, the white wolf and the black wolf. It's a famous, Mesoamerican Indian, Native American, I should say, saying you've got to feed each equally in order to maintain balance. But the fight between good and evil is one thing. The fight between those who seek to oppress and those who seek to maintain freedom is, you've only got to feed one part of that debate, which is the people who fight to maintain freedom and resist oppression. And I think it's naive, and for people to think that this is not going to be interrupted. And innovation is not going to be stifled by pressures that are going to come from the establishment. I mean, man, they start wars, for energy that last decades. If they think their financial system is going to be undermined, you know, just imagine what they're willing to do just to stop that happening.
Well, GP, it's really good having you up here today, and you're welcome back anytime. I want to throw it to our buddy Credit Card Scissors. What's going on, bud?
Yes, sir. Appreciate it, Jerry. GP, I was pretty struck by your analogy earlier uh, of the dog and the owner, if you will. And this is kind of one of my bigger concerns on a kind of political and philosophical level, and the application of AI is the kind of removal of the kind of perceived removal of the human hand, if you will. And for a lot of people, and I don't know if I could necessarily claim expertise in this area, but trying to gain understanding, trying to gain my awareness of very quickly changing the world from a technological level. But many people are just users. Most people just want to, apply the technology. And I guess I have a lot of concern for when this perceived removal of human hand philosophically comes, like, and people don't realize just how much of the spirit of the dog, if you will, is actually encapsulated from the spirit of the owner. Those data sets that you were talking about for inputs, like, is the only way to uh, I guess safeguard that to head toward Web3 and blockchain? Is that kind of what I'm hearing? Is particularly with this technology? I guess me just trying to kind of piece through this from a layman's perspective. But does that make sense?
Yeah, sure, credit card. Yeah, I mean, it breaks down into different areas of training data sets. I think maybe just to refine the analogy a little bit, I mean, bias is introduced into training data sets by people who select the training data who have conscious or unconscious bias in certain areas, which has resulted in very bad outcomes for things like AI run access to social programs in North America where the AI has been programmed or trained incorrectly and has stopped people from receiving social assistance or social housing or other assistance. And because of the lack of explainable AI or the lack of research into explainable AI, the AI is a black box. So when somebody goes to seek why it is that they've been turned down when they're entitled to an entitlement, their query can't be answered. So because basically the person can't say why the black box has made the decision. So that's one poor element of training data sets, which is it is not accompanied by algorithms of XAI, where you can explain why the AI has made the decision that it has. The second area is willful input of bias training data. I don't want to get into a number of examples of that right now because some of them are quite offensive. But the data fed into a system can result in genders or ethnicities being removed from a particular progression in the path of a selection method, for example. The third, and there are others, but the third and final is the false positive training data. And a good way of using XAI or certain elements of XAI is to use heat maps to ask the AI how did you make this decision? And there's a good example of it in the context of a project that was used to identify, and Doctor will have heard me spoke about this before, pictures of wolves in the wild versus dogs. And the training data was fed into the system, and the AI had an almost 100% accurate um, choice of wolf, versus dog. So as far as they were concerned, they had a successfully trained AI algorithm which could, to nearly 100% degree of accuracy, identify a wolf in an image. However, when you apply heat maps to that, it turned out that the reason it was identifying it as a wolf was that all the training data that they provided for wolves had snow in the background. And using reinforcement learning, it wasn't recognizing the wolf. It was just basically saying that this particular type of animal in the training data set is basically surrounded by snow. So the AI people thought is identifying wolves, whereas the heat map shows it's making its decision based on the presence or absence of snow. So that's how training data sets can bias decision making in various different scenarios, and why it's important to make sure that XAI travels alongside AI training data sets.
That's totally wild. Hey, Yaba, nice to see you, man. Haven't seen you in a while. What's going on in your mind?
Hey, man. Good to see you guys. Great to be back on stage, man. I've been traveling, work, whatnot, but been missing my summer nights, man. Came in and it was a heavy conversation. I just jumped in the middle, so I don't want to interrupt or take us off track, man. But I'm glad to hear this, man. It is something that is I'm enlightened by it. So just chilling, man.
Sweet. Well, it's great to have you back. We've actually been off for a couple of weeks, so this is a wicked conversation to come back to. We actually
Yeah, this is heavy.
we we actually had to let Cons go, which was fantastic. But maybe I kind of wanted to circle back to the beginning here. GP, by the way, you're part of are you validating on the BitTensor network?
Not right now, no.
So you're just here, like kind of you're intrigued by the project?
Yes, I'm here doing due diligence, sir.
Okay, all right. Well, very nice to have you. Well, I'm wondering maybe Dr. M there, because earlier in the conversation, Cons was kind of talking about empowering, like, the people who own the network together. You're hearing this conversation. how do you take the responsibility of building this network supporting AI, and how do you see you as an individual can play a role in kind of the outcome of all this going forward?
What a great question. Yes, there is actually tremendous autonomy in the BitTensor network, in the sense that well, the reality, currently is that I'm really just taking some of the, well-performing models, pre-trained models released by other companies, and fine-tuning those to be better, and running those on BitTensor is the current reality. But intrinsically, you have pretty much autonomy in terms of what you can choose, what you can what you want to train, or basically give BitTensor. It's so long as well, I mean, for the moment, at least personally, I have a hard time imagining that anyone would have any ill intentions there in terms of the training of AI. But that's, like, definitely something that to think about, or a concern that can come up, because BitTensor needs to be the way that it is, in the sense that basically each node's model is a black box to everyone else other than the operator of that node. It kind of needs to be this way, because this system drives on incentive and on competition among the people serving models, basically. And it really works too. BitTensor has shown that what has been achieved in a year is, the pace is just astounding. And I think that if some of the larger AI companies are probably just not paying attention, but should they become aware of it, they'll be like, wow, because yeah, it's tremendous. So there is definitely concerns, many of which Cons mentioned along the way. For me personally, I think that the biggest one is just, and Cons touched on this, it is that I'm basically in love with BitTensor. It is a baby, relatively speaking, and it is a tiny network, and I care so much for it. But I also know that there is big potentially ill-intentioned forces that can align against it, and that's kind of my biggest worry. But internally within the BitTensor system, there is what you're doing as a node is basically what you're training, or what model you're using, or really what you're feeding BitTensor is kind of is hidden from everyone else, and it needs to be that way. So because it's the competition that drives the innovation here. And really, I mean, in a way, BitTensor is set out to prove, and has done so in many metrics and ways already. It is set out to prove that this sort of a way to innovate in machine learning, it is more efficient than the established paradigms of developing ML, which is basically two ways, right? You either have industry giants doing it, or you have academia. And I think that, well, what I hope for is that BitTensor will ultimately succeed, and that these concerns will not materialize to become ultimately a roadblock. In which case, surely it will be, widely known that this is the way to do AI, and we're going to see, I suppose, the equivalent of like Ethereum and Generation 3 smart contracting platforms following what BitTensor has done.
Yeah, that's great. That's great stuff. And I think that's kind of keys into one of the powers of blockchain, right? Is to give the keying into what GP has mentioned in the past as well. It gives the little guy a little bit more power, right? Because you have this decentralization, you have this blockchain, which is that truth machine in the background driving the incentives. And if enough people buy into it, over time it becomes censorship resistant, right? And so BitTensor is doing some incredible things. And I did have one more question. If maybe one of Dr. M, maybe, or GP, if you guys may have an opinion on this. I think I heard Ala in one of your spaces, Dr. M, which are great. Love listening to those. Mention that, you know, Bitensor is not to the point yet where they have surpassed OpenAI, you know, with this advent of Chat GPT. Of course, this has been really great, but from an infrastructure standpoint, I guess what would be that point where, you know, they think that they have either maybe not surpassed OpenAI itself, but are the leaders in that space?
Gosh, that's a great question, and one that I in fact asked Const at the last one of those spaces, because I was really curious too. I mean, it's clear to me that Bitensor is not quote unquote competitive yet, but I don't want that to be mistaken for what it's done, because really you're looking at a much faster pace of development that basically can't be done any other way. So not to diminish that, and that's extraordinary, and that's why everyone who's involved is so excited about this. But basically, to answer the question, Const said in about a year is what he said about 2 or 3 weeks ago when I asked him the same question, that when will Bitensor be competitive? And you know, with AI, it is the nature of AI that basically up until you're say the best or near the best, you're going to see basically no use. No one's going to be interested, because whatever, if I can use GPT-3, why would I go and use GPT-2? Now they are by the same entity, but you get my point. But then the moment that you're there, then all of a sudden you go from no interest to all the interest in the world. So we look forward to that, of course. But so a year would be 2 years from the beginning of this system, which is kind of incredible if you think about how long it's taken to get to GPT-4, let's say. So exciting times. The worries along the way, of course, but I just really feel that democratization and decentralization of AI is really a cause worth fighting for, and that people should generally want AI decentralized. And if they don't, yell out wanting this, is because they're likely just not aware of all the ways that already we are being manipulated in all sorts of ways from centralization of AI. I think that's kind of my summary of the sentiment here.
Yeah, totally agree. Kusumari, my view on when they will overtake if OpenAI, well, they're coming up on their second anniversary. We will see a point where word of mouth and the tipping point occurs. And because of the democratization and the involvement of the little person and the lower barrier or the no barrier to entry, as opposed to the massive barrier to entry to contribute in other domains, I expect that 1 to 2 year estimate that Dr. M was given by Const is pretty on point. And I think once that happens, I think they'll just speed away into the distance. That's my take.
Outstanding. I really appreciate you guys coming up here. This has been a great conversation with some incredibly enlightening things in the AI space. I think everybody's really been enamored with GPT-3, right? And seeing a project like Bitensor come to Polkadot and share a lot of the same values and expand on something that's a part of our future. It's incredible. It's exciting to talk about. So I appreciate you guys coming up, and Cons, if you catch the end of this, appreciate you too. Thank you for coming on, and we're looking forward to seeing you guys more often. Feel free to come around, and we'll be having this every week for everyone else. Every Thursday around 9:30 Eastern, we'll be hosting these spaces, talking to different projects, and a lot of times we open it up to the crowd to kind of talk general Polkadot. But I think this is a good place to end it. This has been such a great conversation. I don't know where we really go from here, right? So thank you guys, and we will see you next week.
Much appreciated. Have a good day.